The Eastern Conference team I'm looking at today that lost their play-in is Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh has been this interesting case where I've kind of expected more out of them than what they've granted, and Penguins fans themselves I think have expected more than has been granted. Last year against the New York Islanders, they get swept in the first round, and despite that, we looked at their record this year and we said they won't have a problem with Montreal, and then they lost in four to Montreal. This is not a team that's built for playoffs anymore, apparently. 2018, they lost in round two to Washington, and since then, they've lost a lot. And they altogether they've lost 9 of their last 10 playoff games. Since the play-in round was counted as a playoff round, but they're not technically playoffs, so Pittsburgh technically missed the playoffs. You guys know what I mean. So for Pittsburgh, they're going backwards. And the whole question of is the window closed? I think we can say it is. I think we can say the window's closed on this team being a Stanley Cup champion. And I'm not sure how to go from here. As long as you've got Sid the Kid, this guy right here, as long as you've got Sidney Crosby and you've got Evgeny Malkin, you're not going to be able to do a full rebuild. It's really not going to happen because Malkin and Crosby are going to play well enough that you can have a bunch of crash test dummies on their wing. I'm not talking about the band from Canada, although they're pretty good. But you could have almost anybody on their wings, and they're still going to get a bunch of points, and you're probably still going to win some games. So it is hard to do a rebuild with them in the lineup. Not only that, I don't know that Crosby or Malkin would necessarily sign off on a rebuild either, and you kind of need them to buy into the idea of a rebuild. And then the other problem is they had a pretty good record during the regular season, and Coach Mike Sullivan really dealt with the injuries this team went through really, really well. So, General Manager Jim Rutherford, Coach Mike Sullivan, I would say they're both back next year. They got rid of the assistant coaches, which I think is odd because those assistant coaches also helped them get that regular season record that they had, where they were just percentage points below Philadelphia. And just think, if they had been a top 4 team, maybe by playing in the round robin, maybe they would have been able to come through and play well. I don't think so. I don't think Pittsburgh is built to win in the playoffs anymore. And I'm not sure what really has changed. You look at the 2017 team that won the Cup, back-to-back nonetheless, and a lot of those players are still here. But the league's getting younger. Are the Penguins getting younger? Where's that young, up-and-coming forward for them? I know when they got knocked out and everybody going, that's it, Lafreniere's going to end up in Pittsburgh because it's all rigged for Pittsburgh. It's not, though. And you look at their top 6 forwards, and you've got Malkin and Crosby as the juggernauts down the middle, right? And you're guaranteed one of them's going to get hurt during the season, and then the other one's going to get hurt during the season. Your fear is that both going to get hurt at the same time. But you got Crosby in between Gensel and Rust. You got Malkin between Zucker and Hornquist. They brought in Zucker in part to try to prevent from happening what just happened. And of course, McCann is a guy who has at times shown that offensive upside and that top 6 potential. But in the end, McCann ends up being kind of quiet in this series against Montreal. And I'm not sure how much upside is there with Jared McCann. And I was a huge fan of his in Vancouver, but I don't know how much offensive upside's there. I think at best he's a third-line center. So, for Pittsburgh, their issue is youth. Having that top-notch forward prospect that is going to step in and take over eventually for Crosby and Malkin. Now, they have the number 15 pick that they kept. They had the option of trading it or keeping it, and they decided to keep it this year, and that means next year's is not lottery protected and is traded. So, we'll see how that goes. There's a great danger in letting go of next year's first round pick when you're a team that is kind of on that edge of maybe not being a playoff team next year. And it's possible. And there have been predictions of Pittsburgh falling out of the playoffs that happened this year. It didn't happen. But there have been predictions over the last couple of seasons where I've seen certain pundits saying Pittsburgh's going to fall. This is it. Pittsburgh's going to fall. They've been waiting for it. And maybe this coming season's the year. That number 15 pick is going to be really interesting. Odds are they draft a forward. best player available, it should be a forward in that position. Now, it's possible Askarov drops to 15. It's possible they go with a goalie, but in reality, I think they'll go with a forward. And then their other top 3-round draft pick is number 77. So they don't have their own second-round pick. That went to, I believe, Chicago. And so they only have 2 picks in the first 3 rounds. This is part of the problem for Pittsburgh. They've been trading first-round draft picks for ages. They've been trading prospects, draft picks, to make that run. And this year, or no, it's Minnesota that will get that number 1 draft pick next year, right? Because of the Zucker deal. That Zucker trade could be very expensive for them. So the interesting thing to me is that they have been trading away their futures for their present, which makes sense. But as soon as that team looks like they're going backwards, all of a sudden you look at the prospects and the draft picks you gave up and you think, boy, it'd be nice to have them in the lineup, wouldn't it? It's something. Now, their top 4 defense, there are concerns here. This blue line kind of got lit up by Montreal, which shouldn't happen. Dumoulin, I love Dumoulin when he's healthy. I don't know how 100% he was throughout the series. Letang, I don't know. There are people who absolutely love Letang, think he needs more Norris votes, and there are others like myself who think he's probably a little bit overrated by some of the Penguins fans. He's a really good defenseman at times, but again, a lot of the players you see on the list who are big names are probably a little past their prime. Pedersen had a rough series against Montreal. There were too many times I was writing his name on the board in notes for coughing up the puck. Marino is fantastic. Marino is a legit top 4 defenseman. But the blue line in general is an issue. And Jack Johnson, what do they do with Jack Johnson? They believed they were going to be able to trade him last summer, and it didn't happen. I remember Jim Rutherford saying, no, there's a market for him. And I thought, you're not telling the truth. And he's still a Penguin. So I don't know what you do with Johnson and with his contract. It's not worth buying it out, but it'll be interesting to see what they do. And that blue line needs to change. Goaltending. What do you think of their goaltending? So it's going to be Jarry, right? So Matt Murray, who may be joined by Jordan Binnington as goaltender, who is really beloved by a franchise one moment and then the next, and out you go. And that seems to be the case with Penguins fans when it comes to Murray at times, and I can see that already with Binnington kind of percolating. If St. Louis gets off to a slow start next year and Binnington's numbers aren't great, there could very well be Blues fans saying, hey, he's overrated. I always knew. So with Murray, that's the case too. He got 2 Stanley Cup rings as a rookie, and now it looks like he's probably on his way out of town. And sitting as the number 3 goaltender for them is Casey DeSmith, who showed, when given the opportunity last season, that he can play. He can play, he can be a backup in the NHL. There are a lot of really good goaltenders these days, is what I've learned over the last few years of covering this, where I can watch every team and watch every game. There are a lot of good young goaltenders who aren't in the NHL because there are just that many that are pretty darn solid. Now, one thing for Pittsburgh is they have cap space right now for next year, $12.4 million. But that cap space disappears quickly. Their UFAs, Connor Sherry, who I thought played well in the return. I didn't think, though, that by losing in 4 in the play-in round that necessarily means they're going to want to bring him back. I would not be surprised to see him not come back. Patrick Marlow, this was purely a rental situation. He's already talking about San Jose like he's ready to go back to San Jose. And it would not be a surprise if San Jose were to sign him as a $700,000 UFA when that arrives. And Justin Schultz, who had a miserable last 2 years in Pittsburgh. Just miserable. I would expect him to be picked up on a cheap contract by another team. Might be a steal for another team on a cheap contract. Just miserable last couple of years in Pittsburgh. I blame it on myself because I had him rated as one of the top, I believe, top 20 defensemen in the NHL that one year, where he was really, really, really good, and then it just fell apart. So I'll take the responsibility. I'll take the hit on that one, and I wish him the best wherever he goes. Could he end up going back to Edmonton? I don't think so, but could he end up going back to? Sure, let's just throw that out there. Edmonton definitely needs to change their defensive makeup. Restricted free agents. Jared McCann's an RFA. Dominic Simone is an RFA. In their cases, not going to get a huge raise. It's not going to be a huge raise for either player. UC Ricola, as much as I love the name, he's not going to get a big raise either. But Murray and Jari, that's where things are interesting. So this $12.4 million in cap space, not really. Because both of their goaltenders are due. They're both restricted free agents. And I would think a move happens in the offseason. I would think Jim Rutherford right now sits down and says, you know what? I have to go with Murray or Jari. I'm going to negotiate with one and keep one, and I'm going to try to trade the other. And I would think that's where we'll see Pittsburgh, because we can look to next summer, next fall, whenever it is that we get that expansion draft for Seattle. You don't want to lose anybody for nothing. So in the case that either Murray or Jari has a great year, or both have great years, and Pittsburgh would lose one for nothing, you're better off to make that move right now and say, we'll let DeSmith be the backup. Maybe you bring in Hudobin as the backup. Maybe you bring in Grice as the backup. And Murray or Jari sticks around. I'm thinking it's probably going to be Jari that sticks around, that Murray probably gets moved. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, because, again, with the amount of cap space they have, let's say they keep Jari and then they bring in Grice on, say, a $2 million contract, and Jari makes $4 million. They're already down to $6 million in cap space, and there's other players they have to sign and players they have to replace. Pittsburgh is not going to have a ton of cap wiggle room. And with a flat cap, it does hurt Pittsburgh. It does generally hurt Pittsburgh. Rodriguez is also an RFA. I would think he sticks around in Pittsburgh. I like Evan Rodriguez. We'll see whether or not he stays in the NHL, whether or not they keep him. Should be interesting. And, of course, as I said with the draft, at number 15, they're probably not going to get a guy who's going to play for them right away. At 77, they definitely won't get a guy who's going to play right away. See, I say that, and then it'll happen. But I think they need to focus on the future. I think there may be major surgery needed with this team, but does Jim Rutherford have the courage to make a big move should it need to be made? I remember I made a video, I think it was 3 years ago now, where I said, if Pittsburgh really wanted to shake things up, Malkin would be the guy you'd move. And a lot of people said, you just can't trade Malkin. Now I think if I made that video where I talked about trading Malkin, I think I could get more people to agree with it, based on the idea that Pittsburgh's window's probably closed. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with Pittsburgh in the offseason. And I guess the question I have for people is, so is the window closed? And if it is, do you try to reopen it if you're Jim Rutherford, or do you say, you know what, we're going to have to be bad for a while, we're going to have to figure things out for a while? Or do you try to remain middle of the pack and hope for a run in the playoffs? Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.